They illegally sold my 5,500-acre family ranch for $1 while I slept. Tuesday morning. Sheriff's papers at my door. Ownership gone. My great-grandfather's 1890 legacy wiped out. The thief? Cordelia Blackthorne. HOA president, real estate lawyer, white Tesla tyrant. I confronted her at the gate.
Cordelia, this land's been in my family over a century. You really think you can just illegally sell it?
She smirked.
You read the bylaws, cowboy. It's all legal.
Then she locked my cattle from our century-old springs. Let them suffer. Sold my water to contractors for $50 a truck, while charging me $800 a week to save my dying herd. The diesel stench and the dust? That's the American dream strangled by a power-hungry Karen. But she forgot. I'm a petroleum engineer. I know pressure, and exactly when it explodes. I hit back legally. Every HOA member, including Cordelia, lost their homes. Clean, irreversible. What would you do if they illegally sold your family's land? Drop your worst HOA story below. I'm reading everyone. Stick around. The full revenge starts now. Look, I never wanted to be a rancher. 15 years as a petroleum engineer, good money, traveled the world. But when Dad had his heart attack in 2019, someone had to save the family operation. Copper Creek Ranch, 5,500 acres that my great-grandfather Josiah claimed in 1890. The man walked here from Tennessee with a mule and a dream, dug 3 natural springs by hand, built our homestead from limestone he quarried himself. 4 generations of Whitfields had worked this soil. Never owed anybody anything. The ranch was profitable but cash poor, typical operation. I just dropped $60,000 on new equipment, another $40,000 on herd expansion. Money was tight, but the land was solid gold. Those natural springs kept my cattle alive during the brutal Texas droughts that killed neighboring operations. Then the suburbanites invaded. Willowbrook Estates, 47 cookie-cutter McMansions ranging from $400 to $800 grand. Perfect lawns you could putt on, matching brass mailboxes, HOA rules thicker than a Bible. They started building in 2019, finished in 2022, and immediately began acting like landed gentry. The smell of fresh concrete and chemical lawn treatments drifted across my pasture every morning, mixing with the natural scent of prairie grass and cattle. Progress, they called it. I called it the death of rural Texas. Their self-appointed queen was Cordelia Blackthorne. 58 years old, real estate attorney with silver hair pulled so tight it could slice diamonds. She drove that white Tesla Model S like it was a battle tank, always wore designer pantsuits that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Those ice-cold blue eyes looked at working folks like we were stains on her perfect world. The woman had serious Karen energy, the kind who calls police on kids selling lemonade, then lectures them about permits. Our first meeting happened on a Tuesday morning in March. I'm feeding cattle when I hear expensive heels clicking across my gravel driveway like machine gun fire. Cordelia marches up to my gate carrying a manila folder thick enough to stop bullets. "Mr. Whitfield," she announces without preamble, voice dripping with condescension. "We need to discuss your boundary violations." I lean against my fence post, steam rising from my coffee mug in the cool morning air. "What violations?" She opens that folder with the dramatic flair of a prosecutor presenting murder evidence. "Your cattle are illegally trespassing on Willowbrook Estates property. You need to relocate your herd immediately." "Ma'am, this fence line hasn't moved since my great-grandfather surveyed it in 1892. "Well," she smiles like a shark smelling blood. "Times change. We have professional surveys now, modern technology." She hands me legal papers that rustled like dead leaves. "According to corrected county records, the HOA legally owns 300 acres of your current grazing land, including that spring your animals use. The documents were legal gibberish designed to confuse, but the message was crystal clear. Some mysterious 1952 surveyor error suddenly needed correction, and my family's best pasture, plus the main water source, now belonged to people who thought milk came from grocery stores. Look, Attorney Blackthorne, this land has been in my family for 130 years. Surely we can work this out like reasonable neighbors. She actually laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Mr. Whitfield, this isn't a neighborhood dispute. This is legal reality. You have 30 days to comply with our cease and desist order or face federal trespassing charges. But here's her first real power play. The very next morning, I wake up to find my cattle gate chained shut with a heavy padlock. No warning, no court order. Just Cordelia deciding my 200-head herd couldn't access the spring they'd been drinking from their entire lives. Watching my cattle mill around confused and thirsty while suburbanites sipped coffee 50 yards away, that's when I knew this woman wasn't interested in justice. She wanted conquest. Within 48 hours of that padlock incident, Cordelia escalated to full legal warfare. She hired Pinnacle Land Survey, conveniently owned by her brother-in-law, Marcus Blackthorne. This wasn't just nepotism. It was organized crime with family benefits. Marcus rolled up Friday morning in trucks that kicked red dust clouds across my pasture. Expensive polo shirt, designer sunglasses, soft hands that had never touched honest work. The kind of man who'd sell his mother's grave if the price was right. "Official boundary survey," he announced, not asking permission before trampling my property with equipment worth more than most people's cars. I watched for 3 hours, photographing everything as they deliberately ignored century-old fence posts and original survey markers. These weren't surveyors. They were magicians making 300 acres of Whitfield land vanish into legal documents. 2 weeks later, their professional survey materialized. Pure fiction that cost the HOA 15 grand. According to Marcus, my family had been squatting on HOA property since Eisenhower was president. Not only did they confirm Cordelia's 300-acre theft, but they discovered an additional 50 acres that included my backup spring. The acrid smell of surveyor's spray paint marking fake boundaries on my ancestral soil made me sick to my stomach. But petroleum engineers don't accept surface readings. We dig deeper. I spent evenings of the county records basement, a musty underground tomb that smelled like old paper and bureaucratic neglect. Fluorescent lights buzzed while I traced ownership back to original land grants. Betty, the elderly clerk, took pity and stayed late helping me navigate filing systems older than television. That's where I struck oil. Marcus Blackthorne's surveying license was suspended in Nevada in 2018 for deliberately falsifying boundary measurements for financial gain. Professional land thief. But I found something better. My great-grandfather's original 1890 homestead survey, hand-drawn with detailed measurements and natural landmarks. I remembered from my engineering law classes that original homestead surveys trump modern resurveys, especially with continuous occupation records. The courts respect historical documents over recent corrections, and this was about to save my ranch. The real bombshell? Josiah's survey showed Whitfield property extending 50 acres into current HOA territory. Cordelia hadn't just stolen my land, she'd built her entire subdivision on property my family legally owned. I hired Delilah Vance, a scrappy property rights attorney working out of a converted gas station. Her office reeked of burnt coffee and determination, rescue dogs sleeping on case files stacked to the ceiling. She examined my evidence and grinned like she'd won the lottery. "Ezra, you don't have a boundary dispute, you have a criminal case." We filed a nuclear countersuit claiming the entire development sat on illegally occupied Whitfield land. The legal papers hitting courthouse steps sent seismic shocks through Willowbrook Estates. Cordelia's retaliation was swift and vicious. She filed criminal trespassing charges against me personally, claiming I'd made terroristic threats during our gate confrontation. Complete fabrication, but it forced me to hire criminal defense counsel on top of property litigation. Legal bills, $15,000 monthly, water trucking, $800 weekly. The metallic taste of financial ruin became my breakfast companion. But here's what changed everything. While researching Marcus's criminal history, I remembered Texas adverse possession laws from a property dispute I'd handled during my oil field days. You need 10 continuous years to steal someone's property legally. The HOA had only existed 4 years. Their entire legal foundation was tissue paper in a hurricane. I called Delilah at midnight. They can't claim adverse possession. They haven't occupied long enough. "Ezra," her voice crackled through the phone, "you just found our nuclear weapon." Cordelia responded by calling emergency HOA meetings and passing special assessments, $2,500 per homeowner for their legal defense fund, BOS. Watching suburban families realize their dream homes were built on stolen land was like watching dominoes collapse in slow motion. 23 homeowners signed a petition removing Cordelia as president. The petition vanished from community mailboxes that same night. Security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned during the theft. Standing in my kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at legal bills that could bankrupt 4 generations of Whitfield sweat, I realized Cordelia wasn't just corrupt. She was systematically destroying every safeguard designed to protect ordinary people from exactly this kind of predatory behavior. But she made one critical miscalculation. Petroleum engineers spend careers studying pressure systems, how much stress materials can handle before catastrophic failure. And I was building pressure she couldn't even comprehend. The sound of my coffee mug hitting the kitchen table punctuated a decision that would echo through every McMansion in Willowbrook Estates. If Cordelia wanted to play legal warfare using family connections and forged surveys, I'd show her what real engineering precision looked like. She thought she was fighting a simple rancher. She was about to discover she'd declared war on someone who understood exactly how to make corrupt systems explode from within. Cordelia's next move proved she wasn't just stealing land, she was building a criminal empire on my family's bones. I woke at dawn to the growl of heavy machinery rumbling across my property. Through my bedroom window, I watched HOA contractors installing industrial security gates around all 3 natural springs. Not padlocks this time, but Fort Knox-level barriers with digital combination locks. The message was brutal. Your cattle can die of thirst while lawyers decide their fate. But Cordelia wasn't satisfied with just murdering my livestock. She turned my family springs into her personal gold mine. By 8 a.m., landscaping trucks lined up at my former watering holes like customers at a drive-through ATM. $50 per truckload, cash only. I watched through binoculars as contractors filled 1,000-gallon tanks with water that had flowed freely for my cattle since before Texas joined the Union. The acrid smell of diesel exhaust mixed with the sweet scent of spring water, my heritage being monetized by the gallon. I confronted this madness head-on, parking my dust-covered pickup beside her pristine Tesla. Cordelia supervised the operation in another designer pantsuit, clipboard in hand like a general commanding troops. "You can't sell water from my family's springs." She didn't bother looking up. "Environmental impact assessment shows cattle contamination, cowboy. We're providing public service, filtering and distributing clean water to legitimate businesses." "Your friends' landscaping companies aren't legitimate businesses?" Unlike certain squatters who think century-old dirt claims trump environmental law, her smile could freeze hell. "These springs require protection from agricultural contamination." Then she unleashed her nuclear weapon. An official Texas Commission on Environmental Quality complaint claiming my cattle were polluting groundwater with fecal contamination. According to her fabricated report, my 200-head herd posed imminent threat to regional water safety. The TCEQ notice arrived demanding immediate cattle relocation or face $10,000 daily fines. My own springs, hand-dug by my great-grandfather in 1890, were now environmentally sensitive areas requiring protection. Standing in my kitchen reading government letterhead threatening to destroy 4 generations of ranching, something snapped inside my chest. This wasn't theft anymore, it was systematic annihilation using state agencies as weapons. But my petroleum engineering background included extensive environmental compliance training. I knew Texas water law better than Cordelia assumed. Surface water belongs to landowners. Springs are surface water under state statute. But commercial water sales require TCEQ permits, the same agency she'd weaponized against me. I pulled her complaint and cross-referenced commercial permits databases. She'd never filed proper documentation for her $50 operation. Monday morning, I called TCEQ enforcement, reporting illegal commercial water sales without permits. The penalties? $10,000 daily, exactly what she'd threatened me with. But researching her permit history revealed something devastating. Cordelia charged Willowbrook homeowners $30 monthly spring maintenance fees for maintaining springs she didn't own. 47 homes times $30, 12 months, nearly $17,000 in annual fraud. She wasn't just stealing my water. She was running a protection racket, charging neighbors for the privilege of her theft. Buck Morrison confirmed it at the feed store. Retired plumber, decent man trapped in Cordelia's web when he bought his dream home. "Ezra, our water bills tripled since her spring management program," he said, loading salt blocks into his pickup bed. "Bill shows premium spring maintenance charges I never authorized." Buck slipped me photocopied HOA meeting minutes where Cordelia bragged about significant revenue streams through natural resource management, corporate speak for stealing my water and billing my neighbors. 12 homeowners threatened HOA lawsuits for financial mismanagement. Cordelia's response? Individual lawsuit threats against each disruptive element, promising financial destruction for anyone questioning her authority. Here's the game changer I discovered in those documents. She was also selling excess spring water to 3 different landscaping companies owned by HOA board members' relatives. The woman had created a closed-loop money laundering operation using my family's century-old springs. The constant rumble of diesel generators running those theft pumps became my personal hell soundtrack. Lying awake at 3 a.m. listening to machinery steal my heritage while my cattle stood thirsty 50 yards away, that's when I realized Cordelia's fatal miscalculation. She'd transformed my neighbors from neutral bystanders into fellow victims. Buck wasn't just angry about fraudulent fees. He was documenting every illegal transaction, every forged signature, every backdoor deal. A retired plumber with time, motivation, and detailed knowledge of every pipe, pump, and permit in Willowbrook Estates. The sweet irony? While Cordelia was busy stealing my water, she'd accidentally recruited my most valuable ally, a man with inside access to HOA financial records and a growing hatred for the woman bankrupting his retirement. Sometimes the enemy's greed creates exactly the weakness you need to destroy them. 3 months into our water war, Cordelia decided subtlety was for suckers, time for total annihilation. She filed a motion for summary judgment claiming complete ownership of 350 acres, not just disputed boundaries anymore, but a massive chunk including my main pasture, 2 springs, and the stone foundation my great-grandfather laid with his bare hands in 1890. The real gut punch? She demanded $45,000 back rent for every month my cattle had grazed HOA property since 2019. 3 years times 12 months, over $1.5 million in retroactive fees for my own land. But the killing stroke was buried in legal fine print. Immediate seizure of livestock assets recommended to secure payment of outstanding obligations. Cattle seizure. The sheriff confiscating my 200-head herd as collateral for grazing on my own ranch. Reading those papers at my kitchen table, the rich aroma of morning coffee curdled in my stomach. This wasn't legal strategy. It was financial execution dressed in court documents. But petroleum engineers thrive on analyzing complex systems under pressure, and Cordelia's machine was showing hairline cracks that could split her empire wide open. I dove into Secretary of State corporate filings, following paper trails through shell companies like breadcrumbs through a forest of fraud. The original HOA incorporation told a fascinating story. Willowbrook Estates was never legally authorized to expand beyond its original 200-acre footprint. Those disputed 300 acres of Whitfield land had never been properly transferred into HOA ownership. Cordelia's boundary amendments were filed without required homeowner votes, violating HOA bylaws and state corporate law simultaneously. Every legal action was built on a foundation of forged documents. But then I discovered her masterpiece of criminal genius. Willowbrook Land Management LLC, a shell company where Cordelia had secretly transferred the disputed 350 acres from HOA ownership to her personal control. For $1. She'd literally sold HOA assets to herself without homeowner knowledge or consent. My engineering courses included enough corporate law to recognize this as textbook breach of fiduciary duty. Directors can't sell company property to themselves without unanimous approval and fair market valuation. Cordelia had violated both requirements while pocketing prime real estate through paperwork manipulation. The elegant criminality was almost artistic. File fake boundary expansions, claim HOA ownership of my land, then sell that ownership to her personal LLC. Triple-layered fraud stacked like a house of cards in a hurricane. Delilah Vance had been researching similar cases during late-night strategy sessions in her cluttered office. Found precedent that nukes her operation, Ezra. Morrison versus Lakeside HOA, 2019. When HOA incorporation is voided for fraud, all liens and assessments become unenforceable. That's when the trap clicked into perfect focus. Fraudulent HOA incorporation meant every homeowner assessment, every legal fee, every spring maintenance charge became legally void. Better yet, under Texas joint liability statutes, individual homeowners become personally responsible for their board's criminal actions. I could place liens on every house in Willowbrook Estates, but I needed Cordelia to commit one final, undeniable act of fraud, something so brazen that even her purchased judges couldn't whitewash it. So I did something that looked like insanity. I surrendered. My attorney filed papers dismissing all counterclaims, publicly acknowledging HOA's superior legal position. Channel 8 News reported the rancher had abandoned his fight against suburban progress. Cordelia swallowed the bait like a starving fish. She started calling my ranch Future Amenities Land in HOA newsletters. Golf course architects received consulting contracts. Victory party venues were booked. Custom champagne flutes ordered with Willowbrook Estates, where law prevails, engraved in gold script. While she planned her coronation, I was quietly constructing her gallows. Buck Morrison had evolved into my deep cover intelligence asset. The retired plumber accessed HOA financial records, meeting minutes, and private communications from board members who trusted him as harmless old-timer. "She's bringing in those Dallas lawyers for the hearing," Buck whispered during a hardware store encounter, his voice barely audible over the metallic symphony of clanking tools. "Talking about making a public example. Wants cameras there to document your humiliation." Perfect. Public hearings meant public records, witnesses, media coverage of her confession under oath. The sweet irony was crystallizing. While Cordelia orchestrated my financial execution, she was unknowingly building the stage for her own legal suicide. Because petroleum engineers understand something fundamental about pressure systems, the more force you apply to flawed materials, the more spectacular the explosion becomes when everything finally fails. And I was about to demonstrate that principle using her own fraudulent empire as the demolition charge. While Cordelia planned her victory celebration, Buck Morrison was quietly photocopying the documents that would end her criminal career. The retired plumber had keys to the HOA office and 40 years of instinct for finding leaks. This leak was Cordelia's arrogance. She'd documented every fraudulent transaction like a serial killer keeping trophies. Buck slipped into my kitchen Tuesday night carrying a manila envelope that felt heavy as a tombstone. The smell of photocopier toner mixed with his nervous sweat filled my kitchen. "Ezra, you need to see this before deciding whether to keep fighting." Inside were bank statements, wire transfers, and internal emails revealing criminal enterprise so systematic it belonged in a federal prosecution manual. The smoking gun, Cordelia's personal banking record showing her Willowbrook Land Management, LLC, shell company. 18 months of siphoning $180,000 in HOA funds. Money homeowners believed was paying legitimate legal expenses. But the nuclear warhead was buried in email exchanges between Cordelia and Surveyor Marcus about their land acquisition strategy. Her actual words preserved in digital evidence, filed amended in corporation docs, and corrected boundary surveys today. Cowboy still doesn't realize we've legally transferred his property to LLC management. Once summary judgment confirms ownership, we liquidate his assets to recover our expenses. Brilliant, really. Liquidate. She wasn't just stealing my ranch. She planned to auction off 130 years of family heritage to pay her own attorney fees. Buck's intelligence went deeper. Cordelia had meticulously documented every step, apparently planning to write a book about brilliant legal strategies for rural property acquisition. Her criminal handbook included mail fraud through false incorporation filings, wire fraud via electronic fund transfers, conspiracy with family members to manipulate surveys, organized criminal activity spanning 4 years, federal charges carrying 20-year sentences. The devastating kicker, under Texas joint liability statutes, HOA fraud makes every member financially responsible for board crimes. Innocent families trusting Cordelia to protect their investments were now legally liable for her criminal enterprise. I could place $1.2 million in liens against individual homes, forced sales, foreclosures, financial ruin for people who'd never asked to join Cordelia's war against my family. Sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by evidence, the bitter taste of cold coffee mixing with the metallic tang of righteous fury, I faced a choice that would define my character forever. Option 1, nuclear revenge. Bankrupt every homeowner in Willowbrook Estates. Scatter 47 families across 3 counties, leaving suburban ruins where dreams once flourished. Option 2, precision surgery. Target only the guilty while protecting innocent neighbors manipulated by a criminal they'd trusted with their life savings. Buck's weathered face waited for my decision. This decent man had risked everything exposing corruption not for revenge, but because justice mattered more than personal safety. How many homeowners actively supported her land grab? 7 voted for boundary expansion. He produced meeting minutes. Rest either opposed or didn't understand the vote. She bulldozed objections and rushed approval. 7 guilty parties. 40 innocent families. The engineering solution crystallized perfectly. Use Cordelia's own fraudulent system for surgical removal of cancer while preserving healthy tissue. Federal RICO laws allowed targeting only knowing participants in criminal conspiracy. I could destroy Cordelia's life, bankrupt her 7 collaborators, and offer protection to innocent homeowners in exchange for testimony against their betrayer. The beauty of legal precision: justice served cold, calculated, and absolutely devastating to anyone who'd stolen from my family, while protecting neighbors who'd been victims of the same criminal I was hunting. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is perfectly, surgically legal. The next 3 weeks transformed my kitchen into a war room that would shame Pentagon strategists. Delilah Vance moved her entire practice to my ranch, legal documents carpeting every surface like battlefield maps. The rich aroma of burnt coffee mixed with printer ink and pure determination while we constructed the most devastating fraud case in Texas HOA history. My grandmother's dining table vanished under evidence boxes, whiteboards covered every wall with criminal network flowcharts, and photocopiers hummed their mechanical symphony of approaching justice. I assembled a team that would make the Avengers jealous. Delilah commanded property rights and civil RICO warfare. Marcus Webb, former federal prosecutor turned criminal attorney, coordinated law enforcement liaisons. Buck Morrison supplied insider intelligence and witness recruitment. Iris Lucy, HOA treasurer turned forensic accountant, had spent months secretly documenting Cordelia's financial crimes with accountant's precision. The strategy required synchronized strikes across multiple fronts like D-Day planning. Criminal referrals were prepared for FBI financial crimes, Texas Attorney General Organized Crime Unit, State Bar Disciplinary Board, and IRS criminal investigation. Each agency could deliver independent punishment: federal prison, state felonies, professional disbarment, crushing tax penalties. I remembered from oil field compliance training that RICO convictions allow triple damages plus attorney fees, meaning I could collect $2.4 million from Cordelia personally while she served 20 years behind bars. Civil lawsuits targeted her $850,000 home plus $400,000 in rental properties through federal RICO claims, state fraud actions, and fiduciary duty violations. We'd prepared regulatory complaints with Texas Real Estate Commission for unlicensed development, TCEQ for illegal water sales, county prosecutors for document fraud. Regulatory agencies love destroying corrupt attorneys as public examples. But the trap's genius lay in coordinated timing and physical evidence. My boundary line game cameras had captured 347 photographs documenting continued trespassing by HOA security. GPS surveys proved they'd constructed $15,000 worth of illegal fencing 50 feet inside my property boundaries. Every criminal act was documented with engineering precision. All legal papers sat prepared but sealed. Criminal complaints drafted but unsubmitted. Media interviews recorded but unaired. The entire arsenal waited for Cordelia's final mistake at the summary judgment hearing. Channel 8's investigative reporter Sarah Kim had spent weeks researching Cordelia's background, discovering identical fraud patterns in Nevada and Arizona. We met clandestinely at a truck stop on Highway 287, diesel fumes and conspiracy filling the night air. She's been running this exact scam for years, Sarah revealed, spreading photographs across the truck stop table. Rural properties adjacent to new developments, fraudulent surveys, shell company transfers. She's a serial land thief with law degree credentials. Meanwhile, I engineered protection for innocent homeowners caught in Cordelia's web. 39 families would receive safe harbor agreements, complete legal immunity in exchange for testimony against their betrayer. These cooperation contracts would shield honest neighbors from joint liability while ensuring their evidence helped convict the criminal who'd stolen their trust along with my land. Buck Morrison had evolved into my Underground Railroad conductor, organizing secret meetings in barns, garages, and back porches throughout Willowbrook Estates. His network included teachers, mechanics, nurses, retirees, working people who'd invested life savings in dream homes only to discover they'd unknowingly funded organized crime. 40 families want her in federal prison, Buck reported during another midnight kitchen conference, his weathered hands wrapped around coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. 7 families are hiring lawyers because they know they're guilty as sin. The mathematical precision satisfied my engineering soul. Property liens were calculated to the penny using joint liability formulas. We'd identified which properties were homestead-protected primary residences versus fully exposed investment properties. 8 collaborators owned rental properties worth $3.2 million total, more than enough to satisfy my damages with compound interest. Our timeline was choreographed like military invasion. First week, simultaneous criminal complaint filing across all agencies. Second week, civil lawsuit service on Cordelia and collaborators. Third week, property lien recordings creating immediate title clouds. Fourth week, public destruction at summary judgment hearing with comprehensive media documentation. The evidence boxes stacked in my guest bedroom contained everything needed for complete annihilation. Bank records proving embezzlement, forged incorporation documents establishing mail fraud, recorded conversations documenting conspiracy. Federal prosecution plus civil devastation, all tied with a bow of professional disbarment. Sitting in my command center at 3 a.m., surrounded by proof of systematic betrayal, I experienced the calm focus that came from solving impossibly complex technical problems. Every variable calculated, every pressure point mapped, every potential failure mode anticipated and countered. Cordelia assumed she was intimidating a simple rancher who'd surrender when threatened with bankruptcy and livestock seizure. She was about to learn she'd challenge someone who understood exactly how much stress fraudulent systems could endure before exploding into irreparable fragments. Cordelia threw herself a victory party 3 days before our court date. Champagne, caviar, and criminal confessions, all rolled into one spectacular mistake. The country club celebration featured $3,000 worth of Dom Perignon, custom napkins reading "Where Law Prevails," and a guest list that read like a corruption directory. Judge Morrison, city council members, and every real estate developer within 50 miles. Buck Morrison worked that party like undercover FBI, recording conversations while refilling champagne flutes. The audio he captured was prosecutorial gold. Moving boundary lines is child's play when you understand rural property law, Cordelia's voice carried across the room, crystal clear above clinking glasses. These cattle ranchers are too backward to comprehend modern legal strategies. Next week, I'll own his entire operation and auction everything to recover my expenses. She was literally toasting her own criminal conspiracy in front of witnesses. But celebration had made Cordelia sloppy, and sloppy criminals escalate into terrorism. She hired Decker Investigations for aggressive property protection, mercenaries who specialized in psychological warfare disguised as security services. Their tactics were straight from military harassment manuals. Spotlight trucks parked on my boundary at 3 a.m., running diesel generators that sounded like attack helicopters hovering over my bedroom. Million candle power searchlights swept through my kitchen windows during dinner, turning family meals into interrogation scenes. The constant diesel exhaust mixed with the metallic taste of adrenaline that comes from being hunted on ancestral ground. Security guards followed my truck to town, maintaining precisely legal distances, patrolled my fence lines with surveillance cameras, and documented my every movement like I was a terrorist suspect rather than a rancher defending his heritage. But their fatal mistake was escalating from harassment to sabotage. My phone rang at 4 a.m. with my neighbor's panicked voice. "Ezra, your cattle are wandering Highway 287 in the dark." 30 head of my herd had somehow escaped their pasture, creating a traffic nightmare that could have killed entire families driving to early morning shifts. I threw on clothes and raced to the highway, heart pounding as I imagined station wagons full of kids hitting 1,000-pound bulls at 60 miles per hour. Deputy Jake Hendricks arrived with emergency flares, helping me guide confused cattle off asphalt while documenting the clean wire cuts that proved deliberate sabotage. Someone had precision cut my fence with bolt cutters, timing the release for maximum danger. "This wasn't weather damage or wildlife," Jake said, examining severed wire under his flashlight. "Someone wanted your cattle on that highway during rush hour." The sabotage was attempted murder dressed as property harassment. If families had died hitting my livestock, Cordelia could blame me for negligent cattle management while concealing her role in creating the deadly situation. Her smear campaign launched simultaneously across 3 counties. Anonymous flyers appeared everywhere. Mailboxes, coffee shops, community bulletin boards. Ezra Whitfield, dangerous criminal or innocent victim, featured professional design claiming I was guilty of animal cruelty, tax evasion, environmental violations, and threatening board members with violence. But Buck's security cameras caught HOA board members distributing propaganda at 2 a.m., coordinating their character assassination with military precision. Then Cordelia committed her most desperate blunder, attempting to purchase law enforcement. Jake called me immediately after she approached him outside the courthouse with an envelope thick with cash. $5,000 for security consulting, Jake reported, his voice tight with professional disgust. Monthly payments if I file false reports about your cattle causing public hazards. She wants to buy herself a personal police force. Attempted bribery of law enforcement, state jail felony, 2-year minimum sentence. Jake reported the incident to Sheriff's Internal Affairs, creating official documentation for another federal charge in Cordelia's expanding criminal portfolio. But her nuclear financial weapon targeted my survival directly. The HOA filed emergency liens against my ranch for $78,000 in fabricated legal fees and environmental damages. The fraudulent claims prevented refinancing equipment loans coming due November 1st, engineering my bankruptcy regardless of court outcomes. My banker Tom Crawford delivered the death sentence. That lien makes your property unmarketable, Ezra. We can't extend financing with title clouds this serious. $60,000 in cattle equipment would go to foreclosure unless I could eliminate Cordelia's fraudulent claims within 2 weeks. She'd constructed a financial gallows that would hang 4 generations of family ranching whether I won or lost in court. Standing in my kitchen reading foreclosure notices while spotlight trucks hummed outside, the weight of 130 years of Whitfield heritage pressed against my chest like a crushing boulder. But Cordelia had finally committed the irrevocable mistake I'd been engineering her toward. The emergency lien was filed under oath, claiming damages that didn't exist based on surveys she knew were fabricated. Perjury in official court documents, federal felony charges that would add decades to her prison sentence. While she celebrated approaching victory with champagne toasts and criminal confessions, I was quietly cataloging every harassment tactic, every fraudulent filing, every desperate attempt to destroy my family's legacy. She thought maximum pressure would break my resistance. Instead, she'd provided the final evidence needed to trigger her complete annihilation. Cordelia's victory party planning revealed a woman who'd completely lost touch with reality. She ordered $8,000 in catering for her HOA victory gala, scheduled 5 days after she expected to legally own my ranch. Sterling Catering received detailed instructions for a celebration themed rural modernization through legal innovation, complete with champagne flutes engraved "Where Law Conquers Outdated Claims." The guest list was a corruption directory. Politicians she'd funded, judges she'd purchased, developers who'd profit from my family's destruction. She commissioned a victory speech about evolutionary property concepts that would be live-streamed to real estate conferences nationwide. My silence was feeding her delusions like gasoline on fire. Local news reported the rancher had acknowledged HOA's superior position after my attorney dismissed our counterclaims. Cordelia interpreted surrender as invitation to publicly humiliate my family's 130-year legacy. HOA newsletters started calling my ranch Future Amenities Land. Golf architects received design contracts. She gave interviews portraying herself as a legal visionary who'd protected suburban values from aggressive rural encroachment through innovative dispute resolution. The woman was planning victory laps around my great-grandfather's grave, but while Cordelia designed her coronation, federal prosecutors were engineering her destruction. FBI agent Paula Rodriguez called our evidence the most comprehensive fraud case outside organized crime families. Her arrest teams were positioned within 72 hours of execution. IRS criminal investigation had calculated $127,000 in unreported income from illegal water sales, federal tax evasion carrying mandatory prison time that couldn't be plea bargained away. State investigators had frozen her shell company assets pending criminal proceedings. The most devastating preparation was happening inside Willowbrook Estates itself. Buck Morrison's underground network had recruited 39 homeowners willing to testify against Cordelia in exchange for legal protection. Secret meetings rotated between garages and back porches, decent families sharing evidence of systematic fraud while planning coordinated testimony. "She didn't just steal your land," Martha Webb whispered during a clandestine gathering in Buck's workshop, motor oil and sawdust mixing with the electricity of rebellion. "She stole from every family here. Water fees, boundary lies, special assessments, pure theft disguised as community improvement." These weren't angry neighbors anymore. They were revolution organizing itself. But Cordelia's paranoia was generating evidence for her own prosecution. She filed harassment charges against Buck for stalking and privacy invasion, claiming his HOA meeting documentation violated board confidentiality. The charges were legally frivolous. Texas law makes HOA meetings public record, but revealed complete panic about information security. She was literally trying to criminalize transparency. Her legal costs had exploded beyond $340,000, forcing another emergency assessment of $7,200 per homeowner. 6 families immediately listed homes rather than fund criminal enterprise. When 41 residents signed petitions demanding her removal, Cordelia's response was nuclear: individual lawsuit threats against every signatory for defamation and conspiracy to undermine legitimate governance. She was threatening to bankrupt her own neighbors for exercising democratic rights. October 14th brought her most desperate gambit, demanding my immediate arrest for contempt through continued intimidation. She submitted fabricated voicemails and doctored emails as evidence of terroristic threats during confrontations that never happened. The manufactured evidence was so obviously fake that even corrupt judges would struggle accepting it. But Cordelia had abandoned rational strategy. She wanted me in jail before the hearing, eliminating courtroom surprises. Each fabricated document created another federal charge: obstruction of justice through falsified court evidence. As October 15th approached, her behavior became unhinged. Additional security cameras aimed at my house, frivolous noise complaints about cattle, demands for hourly sheriff patrols of my property line for public safety violations. The calculating criminal mastermind who'd started this war was ending it as paranoid, desperate felon generating evidence for her own conviction. That final night, I sat on my porch where 4 generations of Whitfields had watched the same stars, breathing air that still carried the scent of prairie grass and honest work. My great-grandfather's pocket watch ticked steadily in my palm, the same timepiece that had counted down his final heartbeats defending this exact piece of earth. The weight of 130 years of family sacrifice pressed against my chest, but for the first time in months, it felt like blessing rather than burden. Tomorrow morning, Cordelia would stride into that courtroom expecting coronation as the legal genius who'd conquered rural property rights through innovative boundary manipulation. Instead, she'd witness the precision-engineered implosion of everything she'd built on my family's stolen foundation. The irony was perfect. While she'd spent months trying to destroy the Whitfield legacy, I'd been quietly using her own criminal system to construct her complete annihilation. Sometimes the sweetest justice comes from letting enemies destroy themselves with their own weapons. October 15th, 9 a.m. Courtroom 3B was packed like a heavyweight championship fight. Judge Patricia Hawthorne called court to order while 200 spectators crammed into a space designed for 50. Overflow crowds filled the hallway, 6 news crews set up cameras, and the air crackled with anticipation thick enough to cut with a knife. Cordelia entered wearing a $2,000 Armani suit and diamond tennis bracelet, strutting toward the plaintiff's table like she owned the courthouse. Her confidence radiated through expensive perfume and predatory smile as she nodded to Judge Morrison, her purchased insurance policy sitting behind the bench. I sat quietly at the defendant's table in my best ranch clothes, clean Wranglers, pressed shirt, boots polished but honest. The weight of my great-grandfather's pocket watch anchored me while Cordelia prepared to celebrate stealing 130 years of family heritage. "Your Honor," Cordelia announced, rising with theatrical flair, "this is simple trespassing by a desperate man who refuses to accept legal reality." She presented her fraudulent survey, fake water rights claims, and manufactured boundary disputes with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences for systematic criminal behavior. The defendant has willfully ignored lawful court orders, continued illegal occupation of HOA property, and threatened board members with violence. She continued, each lie delivered with perfect legal polish. Then came her fatal mistake. All HOA filings were completely legitimate and properly authorized by unanimous board vote, she declared under oath, staring directly at Judge Morrison. Every boundary amendment was legally executed according to state corporate law. Perjury, on the record, in front of witnesses and media cameras. At 9:30 a.m., Delilah Vance rose from our table carrying evidence that would end Cordelia's criminal career. "Your Honor, we have new evidence of systematic fraud that changes everything about this case." FBI agent Paula Rodriguez entered the courtroom wheeling a cart loaded with evidence boxes while the gallery erupted in confused murmurs. Cordelia's face went white as courthouse marble. Judge Morrison looked genuinely bewildered. "Counselor, this is highly irregular." "Your Honor," Delilah interrupted, "we're presenting evidence of federal crimes that void this entire proceeding." The evidence avalanche began. Original 1890 homestead surveys proving true property boundaries, bank records showing $180,000 in embezzled HOA funds, forged incorporation documents with fabricated signatures, audio recordings of Cordelia confessing to boundary manipulation and conspiracy. But the nuclear weapon was Buck Morrison's secret recording from her victory party. Cordelia's crystal-clear voice filled the courtroom. "Moving boundary lines is child's play when you understand rural property law. These cattle ranchers are too backward to comprehend modern legal strategies. Next week, I'll own his entire operation and auction everything to recover my expenses." The gallery gasped audibly. Several homeowners started crying. Cordelia's attorney frantically shuffled papers while his client's recorded confession destroyed any possible defense. At 10:15 a.m. FBI, Agent Rodriguez announced federal charges. "Ms. Blackthorne, you're under arrest for mail fraud, wire fraud, RICO conspiracy, and organized criminal activity." Her voice carried the authority of federal law enforcement. Potential sentence, 240 years in federal prison. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh read state charges. Organized criminal activity, theft over $300,000, fraudulent document filing, multiple first-degree felonies. But Delilah's civil nuclear strike was already launching. She filed property liens against 8 homes live in the courtroom, the computer system displaying real-time lien recordings on courtroom monitors for everyone to witness. Total damages, $1. $2 million in fraud recovery, plus triple RICO damages. Cordelia watched her $850,000 home become unmarketable in real time. "This is conspiracy," she screamed, finally losing her composed facade. "He's the criminal. He threatened us. He—" "Ms. Blackthorne," Judge Hawthorne interrupted coldly, "you are in contempt of court. Bailiff, arrest her immediately." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through absolute courtroom silence as Cordelia Blackthorne, real estate attorney, HOA dictator, would-be land thief, was arrested in front of 200 witnesses and 6 television cameras. The gallery erupted. Buck Morrison stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, 39 Willowbrook homeowners request protection from this criminal fraud." Homeowner after homeowner testified about Cordelia's deception. "She told us he was the criminal. We never authorized boundary changes. She stole from our HOA accounts while claiming to protect us." When I finally spoke, the courtroom fell silent. "Your Honor, I just wanted to keep my great-grandfather's ranch. She turned defending my family's legacy into a war I never asked for." The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. Judge Hawthorne's ruling was swift and devastating. Summary judgment denied for plaintiff, counter motion granted for defendant, complete ownership confirmed, HOA incorporation voided due to fraudulent foundation, all restrictions on disputed property removed within 48 hours. At 12:30 p.m., Cordelia was led away in sheriff's van while I stood on courthouse steps, my family's land finally secure after 6 months of legal warfare. The last image burned into my memory, Cordelia's face pressed against the van window, watching her criminal empire collapse into rubble while justice was finally, perfectly served. 6 months later, the smell of mesquite smoke and community laughter filled the air at our first annual Copper Creek Freedom Festival. Cordelia was serving 12 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. The RICO judgment awarded me $2.4 million in triple damages, money that became the foundation for healing our community rather than enriching my bank account. Her 7 collaborating homeowners settled their liens for $60,000 to $95,000 each, their forced home sales funding a victim compensation program that helped innocent families recover from her systematic fraud. Justice wasn't just punishment, it was restoration for everyone she'd harmed. The festival buzzed with 1,500 visitors from across Texas, drawn by a story that had gone viral on social media and inspired similar property rights battles in 12 other states. Local vendors sold barbecue and handmade crafts, while kids played in pastures where my cattle once again grazed freely beside crystal-clear springs. Buck Morrison, elected president of our new voluntary neighborhood association, was grilling burgers and sharing war stories with families who'd discovered that defeating corruption creates bonds stronger than blood. "You know what I learned?" Buck said, flipping patties while his grandchildren chased fireflies. "Sometimes good people just need someone brave enough to take the first swing at bullies." The Josiah Whitfield Memorial Scholarship had awarded college funding to 12 rural students pursuing agricultural science and property law degrees. Our first recipient, Anna Martinez, was studying agricultural engineering at Texas A&M, with plans to return and help family ranchers defend their heritage from exactly the kind of legal predators we'd defeated. Sarah Kim, the Channel 8 investigative reporter who'd helped expose Cordelia's crimes, had become much more than a media ally. We were married in a spring ceremony beside the very springs Cordelia had tried to steal, surrounded by friends who'd learned that sometimes the greatest love stories grow from fighting for justice together. She was expecting our first child, the next generation of Whitfields who would inherit land secured not just by great-grandfather's sweat, but by our community's refusal to let corruption triumph over honest work. The conservation easement we'd established protected 1,200 acres in permanent trust, ensuring that future generations would experience the same prairie sunsets and meadowlark songs that had sustained 4 generations of my family. School groups regularly visited for educational programs about sustainable ranching and property rights, practical lessons in defending freedom through legal knowledge. But the sweetest justice was watching former enemies become genuine neighbors. Martha Webb, who'd been terrified of Cordelia's lawsuit threats, now brought fresh pie to our monthly community meetings. Tom Harrison, initially one of Cordelia's strongest supporters, had become our volunteer coordinator for festival planning. I was an idiot, Tom admitted during one planning session, his voice carrying the humility that comes from recognizing personal mistakes. She convinced me you were the problem when she was the one stealing from all of us. Forgiveness isn't weakness when it's earned through genuine repentance and community service. The legal precedent we'd established, Whitfield versus Blackthorn, was now cited in property rights cases across the American West. Rural families facing similar HOA fraud were using our playbook to defend ancestral lands from suburban colonization disguised as boundary disputes. Standing on my porch each evening, watching cattle graze peacefully while my pregnant wife planned our future, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from engineering problems solved with precision, compassion, and unwavering commitment to what's right. The sound of those illegal fence posts being pulled from Whitfield soil had become the soundtrack of freedom restored through community solidarity and legal courage. My great-grandfather's pocket watch still ticked steadily in my palm, counting down moments of peace that he'd never lived to experience but had somehow made possible through his sacrifice and vision. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't about defeating enemies. They're about building communities strong enough to protect what matters most.
You know what struck me about Asa case? It wasn't the 12 years Cordelia got, or even that 2.4 million judgment. It was that emergency lien she filed right before the hearing. $78,000 for legal fees and damages that didn't exist. She was so confident, so sure she had him cornered, that she put her lies under oath. I mean, the woman was literally days away from stealing his entire ranch. All she had to do was keep her mouth shut and let the corrupt system she built do its work. But she couldn't have herself have to street the knife one more time. That's the thing about people like Cordelia. They always go too far, always get greedy. It's never enough to just win. They have to humiliate you while they are doing it. And sometimes that's exactly what destroys them. Makes you wonder how many other HOA board members are out there right now, thinking they are untouchable, thinking nobody will ever do the work to stop them. Any of you dealing with someone like that in your neighborhood? Someone who thinks the rules don't apply to them? Let me know in the comments. And subscribe if you haven't. Their stories, they are more common than most people realize. See you next week.